in development or new for 2025 is the fact that Central Alliance for Nuclear Accountability organizations, as most of you I'm sure know, follow Bananas or follow the organizations, have recently prevailed in a NEPA lawsuit against NNSA, arguing that a programmatic environmental impact statement is needed for the dual site and production plan at Los Alamos and Savannah River site. While we prevailed on the merits, the judge had the parties, so the three ANA groups plus an additional plaintiff group, along with the agency, we're still negotiating exactly what the remedy will be and how that remedy will move forward. But the plaintiffs have been clear that we are seeking the preparation of a full programmatic environmental impact statement that will have public comment periods for both a scoping process and a draft document process. That will also include public hearings in multiple locations around the country. And assuming that part of the remedy is granted by the judge in the near future, or as I mentioned, we're still negotiating, and will be into January. But hopefully that will result in the programmatic EIS occurring within the time frame of 2025. It could take a year and a half for the full process, but it should be on our radar as ANA groups to engage the public in the opportunity to comment on the programmatic environmental impact statement, hopefully sometime in the next year. And I wanted to give Tom, who's a co-plaintiff, an opportunity to add anything around tin production. I know, Tom, you're on the Zoom well. Want to add that or nuance it in any way?
Thanks, Scott. No, I don't really think so. Something and already getting environmental justice, on transport, and the issue of disposal of the component waste, pilot plant, plus nuclear weapons design, Tony Beasley issue, the Parks River Port, plus right now designated pit sites, Bad River site, Los Alamos. So as Scott said, this is going to be all encompassing. We're hoping that there be also a hearing in one thing. So it's going to be a real opportunity for educational process of nuclear weapons, as well as the environmental impacts of pit production. So I'll leave it at that, Scott. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So I'll kick it back to you, Tom B, to talk about UPS. And I assume we're going to have any questions until we're through the slides. Is that right, Tom B?
Yes. So we'll have some Q&A at the end for y'all to ask questions. But next slide, please. So one of the Peace Pod's major concerns is cost overruns at NNSA sites, which Scott will delve further into on the next slide. But the poster child for these cost overruns is the uranium processing facility in Oak Ridge. UPF is being built to replace the old deteriorating buildings at the Y-12 weapons complex. And these contain enriched uranium for nuclear weapons. So these buildings were built during the Manhattan Project in the 1940s and haven't been remodeled since. So they're extremely old, they're falling apart, they're not earthquake safe, and fires frequently break out in these buildings containing uranium. So that's a big risk to the workers inside, big risk to the surrounding environment as well. So the uranium processing facility will replace some, but not all of these old buildings. Before, the project did want to replace all of these buildings. However, the project has been scaled back and there's still going to be some old buildings in operation. UPF was originally slated to cost $6.5 billion, and that was the cap. That was what was promised, as it's not going to go any more than 6.5 billion. It is now estimated to cost 10.3 billion and counting as of October. So who knows where that final number is going to be. And it will not be operational until 2031. So, and that was previously scheduled to be done in 2025. So that's 6 more years of workers continuing operations in these unsafe buildings. So that's what we're extremely concerned about. And PeacePod is therefore concerned with this lack of accountability. What's also happening in Oak Ridge is that it's becoming a hub for uranium operations. So a new uranium enrichment facility will be operated by Arena, which is a private company, and that will be coming to Oak Ridge. So DOE will actually transfer federal land to this private company, and this shows like the growing trend of private companies operating nuclear weapons sites. Oak Ridge isn't the only place in the country where this is happening. Kansas City, for example, is also where this big issue is happening as well. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Anne to talk briefly about the Kansas City plant, which is another big weapons site.
Just a brief history about Kansas City. Of course, Kansas City was probably started because, Harry Truman was from there, from part of Kansas City metro area. But it started in 1949, and then they built a new plant in 2014, even though we opposed it ferociously. And there was 2,400 employees at that time. And during the Cold War, there was 9,000 at the old plant. Very, very contaminated old plant, including radioactive substances there. The new plant, supposedly no radioactive substances. I don't know. I did notice that it is not listed on the Department of Labor's sites for being part of the EEOIC program. Anyway, so in the last year, they have actually doubled in size, and they will be, it's a multi-year project, so they will continue to increase every year. The number of employees is now over 7,000, and Kansas City plant makes mechanical parts and electronic parts, and they make nuclear weapons work. They guide it, they set it off. So there would be nuclear weapons without Kansas City. And there used to be just one program. Now there's 7. So this is a big part of the modernization of nuclear weapons. In other words, nuclear weapons forever. And it is a $1.3 billion site. That's his budget. Some of the projects they are working on are B6112 LEP, which is where we, share those with places, I think about 5 places in Europe, including in the US. The W88 Alt 370, which is the Navy's Trident II sub-launched missile. W80.-4 LEP, which is the LRSO weapon. W87-1, which is replaces an aging W78 warhead, which is ICBM, and the W93 program, which is sub-launched ballistic missile also. They also have listed under the laboratory table for the Kansas City plant, enterprise pit production, plutonium modernization, plutonium disposition. I don't know exactly what that means, but they also work with a reworking of something called the MK1 or modernization program for the MK21. And that was not in the table, so there's no listed price for it, but that is a thermonuclear bomb, gravity bomb, first produced in 1955, based on the Castle Bravo test, which you all probably heard about. So that's 1.5 million square feet were constructed in 2014. The new is going to be 2+ million square feet just across the street from it. So that's manufacturing and office space. And, anybody have any questions? Okay, this is a project with Promontory 150 LLC, which is a, like she was saying, private public deal.
Thanks, Ann. So I briefly talked about that lack of accountability as costs keep going up and up. So Scott's going to delve a little further into that.
Thanks, Hanvi. So you guys might remember last year, one of our big talking points on weapons was to discuss with members of Congress the Dunn-McCurdy Act violation that occurred with the Sentinel ICBM missile budget, which triggered this process at the Department of Defense, in which they had to prove to Congress that the weapon was essential to national security, or at least claim that it was. They had to legitimize costs and find offsets and go through this legislative process that the act sets up. And at these meetings, members of the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability met with members of Congress to both discuss the Sentinel cost overruns, but also point out that the National Nuclear Security Administration has cost overruns of its own, but has no Dunn-McCurdy-like process. There is some legislation that requires cost overruns to be explained, but nothing to the extent of the DoD's Dunn-McCurdy law. So we advocated in meetings that members of Congress do something about this, and Representative Don Garamendi, who's on the Armed Services Committee in the House, congressman from California, inserted directive report language in the National Defense Authorization Act, and directive report language moves forward whether or not the overall act does. So it directs the Government Accountability Office to provide a briefing to the House Armed Services Committee no later than the end of this year on recommendations and options to apply a Dunn-McCurdy type process for NNSA to address significant cost overruns across the NNSA enterprise. So while this hasn't happened yet, it will apparently sometime this month, and it could provide additional information for us to then support the recommendations that GAO makes for legislation to increase oversight and accountability around cost overruns at NNSA. Our theory here is that the NNSA consistently across its projects lowballs or purposely underestimates costs for nuclear warheads and the production facilities like UPS that Tommy was talking about, like the plutonium pit production site at the Banana River site, where costs have exploded to an estimate of $25 billion. But when they underestimate these costs initially, it makes it easier for Congress to give additional approval, and then they increase the cost over time once the project's already started, when it's more difficult for Congress to cut. And it's shown that Dunn-McCurdy has curbed that same reality at the Department of Defense, meaning studies have shown that a result of that law is that cost estimates have become more realistic from the outset, allowing for Congress to have a more realistic idea and more realistic debate at the outset of a project about whether they think that project is worth its cost. So a similar process at NNSA could result in a downscope or cuts at projects to begin with that tend to go way over budget. So that's our hope, is to get some more cost accountability, that it would result in more constrained nuclear warhead projects at NNSA. And we hope that in 2025 we'll have an opportunity with these recommendations and options from the GAO, which, by the way, only happened because of our ANA advocacy. So we should give ourselves a pat on the back for this.
Thanks, Scott. I guess.
I'm talking about testing as well. Is that right, or are you going to talk about it?
Do you want to talk about it, and then I can end with rule of law?
Yeah, that sounds good. So, while we aren't real sure about the specific warhead programs that might be elevated or expanded upon in this new administration, all signs point to an increased interest in resumption of full-scale explosive nuclear testing in the new administration. Various statements have been made that the U.S. does not intend to ratify TTBT by members of the administration, and following on to that new nuclear testing should be, or the ability to test should be expedited to support nuclear modernization. ANA has a long history of both supporting ratification of the TTBT. The U.S. has signed CTBT but not ratified, and that's the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. ANA has a long history of challenging the other previous attempts to increase readiness for nuclear testing at the Nevada National Security Site, formerly known as Nevada Test Site. And ANA has a long history of speaking about the dangers and the proliferation risks of nuclear testing. And now is the time for us to again take up this mantle of speaking out against the resumption of U.S. nuclear testing, of explosive nuclear testing, and the risks involved. And the Peace Pod will be developing more materials about the risks and the proliferation, provocative nature of testing, and it will be a major focus for the Peace Pod at DC Days this year. Go ahead.
Thanks, Scott. Lastly, we want to end on rule of law. So there are two different treaties in our Peace Law 2025 goals. The first one is the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Currently, the U.S. is in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which we have signed, that aims to stop the proliferation of weapons from nuclear to non-nuclear states. As we do have weapons overseas in Europe.
Ian was mentioning the Ruby Island Treaty,
Okay.
peace treaty between the United States and China. You can violate it by other text.
Thank you, Ian, for that comment. So we have that treaty, we have the NPT. However, the NPT is not very strong. There is no enforcement mechanism, as we're in violation of that, and that means nothing apparently. And a solution to this was the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It was enacted in 2021, and that makes all facets of nuclear weapons illegal under international law. So whether that be possessing weapons, transferring, threatening to use, anything under any sort of nuclear weapons is illegal under international law. And this is currently the strongest nuclear weapons reduction treaty. Every year, states parties must meet to work on this treaty, work on an action plan, essentially put flesh on the skeleton of this treaty. Currently, there are 73 state parties that have signed on to the treaty. There have been more that have ratified the treaty. There have been more that signed but not ratified. And again, every year, state parties have to meet. Next year, it's going to be in New York City. Last year, it was also in New York City. So that's twice in a row that this has happened in the U.S. And ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, does youth events. So last year, members of the Peace Pod actually attended the second meeting of state parties in New York at the UN. Hopefully this year, more youth events will happen. Hopefully we can send more students to get engaged on nuclear weapons issues, because I think that it's really important for young people to join the movement. Currently, there's not a lot of young people in the movement, and that's what we're lacking, is to like spread to that next generation. So I think these meetings of state parties and ICANN's youth events are a great way for youth to get involved. So we kind of just wanted to end on that, optimistic activism. Okay, well, thank you. And now's the time for some Q&A if anyone has questions. You can just go around the room.
Okay, I'm planning on going to New York. Are you going to be there in March?
Right now, Aretha is doing the accreditation process. So we got accredited last year, so we should be accredited again. But yes, we're planning on taking some students.
I'll join Wilt and go to
Okay,
that.
perfect.
Okay. I am bringing my granddaughter. I'm really excited about that. Yay! And so I really want to get her involved in the youth aspects of it. And so I'm giving you my card, and I'm asking you if you will keep me in touch with her.
Perfect, I will. Thank you.
When exactly in March is it?
March 3rd through the 7th.
Actually, you should be there on the 2nd too, because the NGOs are having a whole bunch of stuff going on Sunday.
Okay, so March
Right,
2nd.
yeah,
Okay.
we plan to ride on
March 2nd, the 7th.
Diana's asking you to repeat the questions.
Okay, we just got a question on the dates of the third meeting of state parties in New York City, and it's going to start on March 2nd and end on the 7th. I know last year there was a big protest with all the NGOs that attended, so that was pretty cool. It was just very cool. It was late November, so it was a very chilly day. But protests, youth meetings, some documentaries to watch. Yeah.
And I'd also like to announced that on March 4th at 6 p.m. there will be the nuclear-free future award ceremony, to which you are all invited. It will be at the Cooper Union Great Hall. And you'll probably see a save the date announcement coming out soon.
Can we put this in the
Sure.
chat, maybe,
Yeah.
to like,
Yeah.
maybe put in the chat too. Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Tanvi, Ann, and Scott. Excellent presentation. I was just hoping to ask a quick question on the Nunn-McCurdy issue. I think that's a really interesting tactic. And I was wondering, Scott, can you hear me okay, Scott? Yeah, I was wondering if you could please just remind us, just in case anyone else in the room has the same question, how does the Nunn-McCurdy Act currently apply as opposed to what we're asking for? Did you say that it applied to the Sentinel ICBM missile? That triggered a review of the budget process for the Sentinel ICBM missile? And how does that, so if we're asking for this to apply to NNSA, would the new version then apply to the Savannah River site, the Tony Pit expansion?
So the Nunn-McCurdy Act only applies to Department of Defense budget cost overruns. So it applies to the Sentinel missile development, for example, but it does not apply to the NNSA's W87-1 warhead development for the Sentinel, because NNSA, which develops the warheads for all the delivery vehicles that DoD develops, isn't subject to Nunn-McCurdy. And if there was a Nunn-McCurdy for NNSA or a Nunn-McCurdy like legislation, it would also apply to all of NNSA's production sites and labs, all of the physical development that NNSA does, like how and Nunn-McCurdy does apply to the DoD, Department of Defense's production work, like when they're developing submarines or building facilities. Nunn-McCurdy applies there. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you. That sounds like a really interesting tactic. I'm really grateful to ANA for submitting this.
Any more questions?
Question, I think it was the first slide up during the talk. It had a line about the middle of the middle paragraph. It said that experts have said that yes, there are pits in the internet. I don't think that was a secret. The point the expert said to Jason years ago was that those pits had a lot more light than they had been assumed to have, and therefore what the hell do we need these pits for? Is that sentence in an earthly cut or something?
Trying to pull it up right now.
It was the pit production slide.
The pit production slide. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
they
right.
call it that.
Which sentence was it?
Independent experts have concluded that pits are already stored in there. Well, yeah, and they have a lot more life than they had initially been thought to have. That's the point. Not that they're there. I think that's pretty well known.
Why is that we don't need more?
Right.
I think they want to shape them just a little bit different so they
I
can
know,
fit
I
in
know
the
what
bomb.
you think.
So they can make more money.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. I know what they're saying, but it's baloney, and that's what we got. But that sentence, I don't fully.
You're right, the sentence isn't fully concluded. I think what we're getting at there is that there's existing kits that could potentially be reused that are currently stored at Pantex.
Yes, and the point is they have a lot more life than they had initially been thought.
That's correct.
So it's-
Yes.
Thank you.
Agreed. There's a pit aging study. could provide more evidence that reuse of existing pits that are stored at the Pantex plant is a viable option rather than new plutonium pit production.
Let's not even use it.
True. Okay, yeah.
I don't know how treaties work, but in terms of the non-proliferation treaty,
Mhm.
you mentioned that there's no enforcement mechanism.
Mhm.
Can they be changed over time to FT and be continued to live on them? Are they like living documents that are always continually subject to change?
Mhm. I do feel like theoretically.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yes. She asked about treaties and the non-proliferation treaty, which essentially has no enforcement mechanism. So are these treaties like living, breathing documents that can be changed over time to have enforcement mechanisms? And that was essentially the question. I feel like theoretically, yes. But realistically, so all these treaties fall under international law. Realistically, under international law, there really is not any sort of enforcement mechanism, unfortunately. I mean, if you look at like the United Nations, they can say something and be like, okay, stop this war. However, how much teeth is really behind what they say? And I feel like that's like, unfortunately, the reality of international law is that lack of enforcement mechanism. So I feel like that would be like reworking the entirety. Even like, let's look at environmental law, and some of these lawsuits that have arisen. There have been instances where Arepa, for example, we filed a lawsuit in 2019 against DOE, for them failing to do proper earthquake analysis at Y12. We won that lawsuit. However, nothing really happened because of it. There was no enforcement to make sure that DOE did proper analysis and did a proper environmental impact statement because of that guise of national security. So national security did trump environmental law in that instance. And it happens in a lot of instances. So unfortunately, these kinds of laws, like international environmental, there is no sort of enforcement. Mm-hmm. And it's sad. Yeah.
I just say real quick,
Yeah,
we're supposed to end now, but we
Okay.
started late. You know, it's a 5-minute break, snacks are out there. So I suggest we just keep going and end the peace pod and then begin the green pod. So if folks need a break, please feel free to, there's snacks out in the hall. And we'll just have another question and then we'll start green pod as soon as this is over.
Sure. So one, I was just going to mention, positions for social responsibility, definitely planning to do some youth-related events and organizing at the United States parties in New York, and we have a young roughly staffer who will be there and does a lot of stuff with the youth UN things. Anyway, I was going to ask about testing. I mean, it seems like this is a real opportunity. Like, hopefully there'll be a lot of visibility around this if and when this comes up. And so, yeah, I'm curious. I don't know if Ian wants to say anything, or are there specific groups that have things already planned, or are there ways we should be coordinating to tell stories of existing impacts and to raise that as an issue?
Ian, would you want to jump in? Let's see.
What was the question again?
Just about the resumption of testing. It's obviously going to impact the Nevada test site and the area surrounding it. So is there some kind of activism that you all are doing in your community to push back?
I think, what I'm proposing and talking to my communities about is, as I put in the, comment, well, maybe I did, it would be simple, both in state and what I'm gonna try to do here in Nevada state and as well as California, whichever state, a small line, of standalone or, in addition to some legislation, one line that says, any federally funded projects, to prevent environmental racism through ownership. And the idea is to force those federally funded projects to improve ownership, particularly treaty territory, which they can't do because, and they couldn't do it anywhere else that there's an Indian treaty. So if you want to sign a nuclear facility, a nuclear reactor, you want to build a road, a highway, a rail link to these sites using federal funds, let's not be racist about how we do that and prove ownership. That is the requirement for Yucca Mountain because the intent there is to destroy and withdraw those lands forever. So the U.S. government has to prove ownership. So at the state level, state and Nevada state legislature, you want to do right, we've got 2 million people into this, Las Vegas into Nevada in the past 40 years. 2 million people that we're not here. Our revenue is 150,000. There's more cows than people. And that's the case. But wherever there's an Indian tree, look around you where these facilities are. This is what I'm proposing, one line, or something of that effect that, to prevent environmental racism, any federally funded projects to ownership. Simple line, standalone bill, add on to a bill, something right in that area. That's how I propose to prevent environmental racism. And a lot of people don't have an understanding of where treaties are, where they come from. They're meant to preserve the existence of both parties signatory to those treaties. And that's why they are supreme in the U.S. Constitution. Indian land binds this nation together. Indian treaties make this nation what it is today. And all of you have inherited rights, even though there are violations of law. These are the where your rights to this land lawfully come from. So I'll just leave it right there, and we'll continue to think about it.
Thanks, Ian. Okay. Any more questions? Perfect.
This next session, again, will be 40 minutes, 20 minutes of presentation and 20 minutes of Q&A discussion. It is a plenary on waste, green pod. The speakers are John TikTok, who will present online, and myself, and Nicholas Peterson, going to take part as well in the room. So, didn't discuss the order of presenters. I'm totally open. Do you want to go first, or would you rather go second?
Either way is fine. I kind of end with the lead in for Nicholas, so.
Okay. I might suggest, how about I go first, and then you go, and then Nicholas. Yeah?
Fine.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna try to time myself here. So I'm gonna speak for 10 minutes or less, and Don for 10 minutes, and Dave 10 minutes to speak. So for those who may have joined online, might not know me, I'm Kevin Camps. I'm radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear, and I'm currently the president of the board of ANA for another 24 hours or so. And I'm speaking about a couple subject areas. One is consolidated interim storage facilities, and the other is radioactive waste generation. And so maybe I'll just start with radioactive waste generation, because that is what drives the supposed need and justification for consolidated interim storage. So where is irradiated nuclear fuel generated? It's generated in commercial reactors and military reactors. A lot of the focus anymore is on the commercial side of things, because military production has kind of petered out for a time anyway. Hopefully it won't come back. On the commercial side, we have approaching at this point, since 1957, approaching 100,000 metric tons of irradiated nuclear fuel also called spent nuclear fuel, but it's euphemistic. Sometimes referred to as high-level radioactive waste. That's legally not accurate to call it that, but it is highly radioactive nuclear waste, high-level waste. And so consolidated interim storage facilities are a plan B because the industry didn't get yucca. The industry would still like to get yucca. And in fact, the current 2 consolidated interim storage facilities in the United States, the companies are called Holtec in southeastern New Mexico and Interim Storage Partners in extreme West Texas. They're only 40 miles apart from each other, these 2 facilities, less than that. They are essentially a single dump site. They're trying to turn that neck of the woods into a nuclear waste sacrifice area for the country. And some of our expert witnesses in the resistance have even questioned why the capacities they've asked for. At Holtec, they've asked for 173,000 metric tons of capacity. Like I just said, there's less than 100,000. So they seem to be planning ahead. And on the interim storage partners in Texas, they've asked for 40,000 tons, more than 200,000 tons, which is 3 times the capacity factor of yucca. Yucca is limited to 70,000 metric tons, unless they revisit the question and unless a second repository is available. And then technically yucca could take more with a second repository, a permanent repository. So we've been fighting interim storage for a very long time. These aren't the first targeted sites. Skull Valley Goshoots in Utah, Glenn was very involved in that and created a tremendously powerful logo, a Thunderbird logo, in resistance to that dump. We stopped that dump, but it took a lot of effort at the grassroots level. And when they didn't get away with it, they immediately started targeting new sites. Unfortunately, the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future decided that consolidated interim storage was the way to go. We've been fighting it ever since, including legally, which has been my focus. We went through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, licensing procedures that took several long years, but some good news, again, we broke records on the number of public comments submitted in opposition to both the Texas and New Mexico sites. There's folks in the room who took part in these efforts. Another tremendous victory at the grassroots and state levels was the passage of state laws saying no, not here, not without our consent. It's little known because there's so much lip service given to consent-based siting, including by the Blue Ribbon Commission itself, including by the U.S. Department of Energy. It's not required under federal law, consent, but they talk about it a lot. So the states have said, without our consent, you can't go forward with these dumps. And Holtec, the day that the New Mexico law was passed, Holtec was quoted in the press saying that they would challenge that law. And so I'm kind of mixing the 2 subject matters. So I'll get back to waste generation. So there could be legal challenges against these state laws. What our NRC licensing proceeding fight turned into was a federal appeals court battle. And we were in multiple federal appeals courts. The Environmental Coalition, joined by a strange bedfellow ally, Baskin Oil, who has mineral rights next to and under these sites. Family-owned, more than 100-year-old oil company, natural gas company, ranching company, agriculture. So they're with us in the DC circuit. That's where that is a place we have lost at every turn in the DC circuit. Incredible. Out in Denver, the 10th Circuit, the state of New Mexico went there and lost at every turn on both dump fights. The only victories that we've won in federal appeals court at the circuit level was in New Orleans, the 5th Circuit. Baskin Oil, its natural gas, oil, and agriculture allies went to New Orleans, also convinced the state of Texas to go with them. So that's our coalition. It's pretty remarkable. We have Governor Abbott in Texas, and we have Governor Lujan Grisham in New Mexico. It's quite a broad spectrum, politically speaking, involving lots of sectors. Our standing in these court cases beyond nuclear is provided by family-owned ranches, some of whom live within a mile of the proposed New Mexico dump site. So we're working with ranchers. I'm an aspiring vegan.
So the coalition is powerful. And where it's at now is the other side, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which has licensed both dumps despite our efforts. The Department of Justice, representing the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Solicitor General, the U.S. federal government appealed to the Supreme Court. And unfortunately, because we were winning, we had a ruling from New Orleans that these licenses should be vacated, nullified. So the Supreme Court has stepped in. They've taken the case. They want to hear the case. Who knows what that means? The Supreme Court would have to reverse itself in major ways on recent decisions if they were to rule in favor of these licenses, in favor of going forward, specifically West Virginia versus EPA, where the EPA was told, EPA, you do not have congressional authority to regulate greenhouse gases. It's called the Major Questions Doctrine, which was a Supreme Court ruling just a couple years ago. Another one is Loper-Bright, the ending of the Chevron deference doctrine, where the courts now do not need to defer the expertise of the federal executive branch agencies. It had been on the books for 50 years. The Supreme Court would have to reverse itself on both of those recent rulings, but this is the nuclear industry. And so we have deadlines now. I haven't even seen the filings by the other side from yesterday. That was their deadline. NRC, DOJ, the dump companies. A week from now, a friend of the court briefs from pro-dump allies like the Nuclear Energy Institute and who knows how many more, the industry probably. Our side's deadline, Fasken Oil in the state of Texas, is January 12th to file written briefs to the Supreme Court. A week later, friend of the court briefs by groups like Beyond Nuclear, the Environmental Coalition, which is Sierra Club, and a national grassroots coalition. And Wally Taylor from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, has represented the Sierra Club state chapters all this time for almost no pay. Terry Lodge has represented the Environmental Coalition. Diane Curran and Mindy Goldstein, who is director of the Turner Environmental Law Clinic at Emory, right here in Atlanta. She's been pro bono, and Diane has done tremendous work for us. So we will get our friend of the court briefs in by whatever that date is, a week after. And then oral arguments are scheduled for March 5th. So that'll be the, we'll get a ruling from the Supreme Court by the end of June 2025. Even if we win, we're going to have to defend the legal victory in Capitol Hill. And Nicholas is going to talk about waste incidentals reprocessing. There's an example of Jeff Bettis at NRDC winning a court victory in Idaho. You can't abandon these high-level radioactive waste sludges in these underground tanks. It says so right in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. You can't do that. Idaho National Lab, DOE, won that court victory. DOE and industry went up to the Hill and got the law changed, at least in Idaho and in South Carolina, SRS. Sure, go ahead, abandon high-level waste. Just call it low-level waste with a stroke of a pen. So now they're trying to do it at Hanford and West Valley, New York. So there's another fight. So that's where some of the consolidated interim storage fight is. I wanted to mention that both dumps, Texas and New Mexico, have assumed Yucca Mountain as the final repository, and NRC gave them licenses based on that assumption. So the truth about interim storage is it's a lie. It's not interim. It's not going anywhere once it gets here. What would the vote be in the House of Representatives to move it again? It'd probably be something like 434 to 1 against moving it again. In the Senate, 98 to 2. So just a few more words, because I've taken up my time already, on waste generation. So, we have a grand total of 135 reactors in the United States. Some 40 have closed. We're down to about 95 still operating. Of course, they propose new ones like Vogtle 3 and 4. So here's new waste that didn't have to happen. It's not a good idea. Of course, the talk of the town now, because the gigantic new reactors, as I mentioned earlier, there were 36 proposed gigantic new reactors under the Bush-Cheney nuclear power relapse from 20 plus years ago. 2 of them broke ground and actually fired up, and it's gone horribly badly.
You think you'd learn a lesson from that, but no, we're gonna go to the other end of the spectrum now, and they call them small modular reactors. Snake River Alliance is one example, fighting tooth and nail against small modular reactors out there with some success. The lead project in the country, NuScale, 8 SMRs. Bankrupt, as far as I know, canceled. But, you know, they're still pushing it. And a new category I wanted to get out there, because I'm working on it a lot, is zombie reactors, as I call it. There have been zombie reactors before, Bellefonte in Alabama, for example. They kept trying and trying and trying. Watts Bar was a zombie that made it, Watts Bar 2, not too far from here, up in Tennessee. But it took them 43 years to build Watts Bar 2 and actually fire it up. And it went about as badly as Vogtle 3 and 4. So the newest category beyond SMRs is zombie reactors. These are closed reactors that they want to now bring back to life. And these are all sources of new waste generation. And so the lead candidate is Palisades in Michigan, near my hometown. A grand total of more than $8 billion in public subsidies, mostly federal, to restart this reactor. The newest candidates are 3 Mile Island Unit 1, the one that didn't melt down in 1979. And the third one is Dwayne Arnold near Des Moines, Iowa. And Wally Taylor's fighting that too. So we've got a lot of reactors to stop. The ones that still exist, the 95 from previous generations of, industry effort. The SMRs, there's so many proposals out there, and now these zombie reactors that we're trying to nip in the bud. And, the first rule of an overflowing bathtub is to turn off the faucet. So that's what we're trying to do. And I'll close there and turn it over to Don.
So Liz, if you can put up the slide, please.
Turn it this way here.
So I'm going to be talking, this is Don Hancock from Southwest Research and Information Center in Albuquerque. We're going to be talking about the defense waste issues and primarily focusing on the wastewater waste pilot plant in Mexico, which is not just a Mexico issue because it receives waste from various sites around the country. Talk about cleanup and leading into what Kevin also mentioned and Nicholas can talk about in terms of Hanford being a particular target as administration. Next slide. So WIP mission has a 4-part mission to start clean, stay clean. That's DOE speak for up to 175,000 cubic meters of plutonium contaminated waste. DOE likes to now say Congress said exactly that amount of waste, which of course is not what the law said. To get it to WIP, which originally when it opened in 1999 had no waste there, so the waste has to be safely transported by truck through more than 20 states without serious accidents or releases. And the purpose of that is to safely remove transuranic waste from DOE sites. And then finally, WIP is supposed to safely close, decontaminate, and decommission. Beginning in 2024, this year, well, DOE decided now they don't want to do that, so they're talking about 2083 or later, which is why we in Mexico say this is DOE's plan forever. Next slide. So this shows the transportation route. The 6 major sites to ship waste to WIP are Rocky Flats in Colorado. A lot of Rocky Flats waste is shipped to Idaho, so Idaho now packages to send it to WIP. And then Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, of course, in Mexico, and then 2 sites in the southeast, Oak Ridge and Savannah Riverside. So these are the major sites. There are what we call smaller sites that have shipped them. Next slide. So last year, a major event, 3 of the ANA groups, Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety, Nuclear Watch New Mexico, my organization, Southwest Research, negotiated a new permit the state of New Mexico has issued for WIP to operate. And we were able to get 3 key new provisions put in the permit. And with some enforceable mechanisms with them. So to try to avoid the problem that Tandy mentioned in terms of not having enforceability. So the priority now is to dispose of New Mexico coal or legacy waste. Requires an annual certification that all of that land legacy waste can be disposed of in licensed permitted facilities and WIP. Second, that a legacy waste disposal plan has to be developed to show what DOE plans are to put all the waste into products and reserves. Last currently permitted panel for legacy waste only. And then thirdly, on an annual basis, to issue a repository citing report on DOE's progress to actually develop a repository in another state. Because, as Kevin mentioned, in terms of your amount, you have a volume limit on WIP, but if there is no other repository, it would be difficult in the future for Congress to change that limit. Next slide. So up to now, WIP was for this Cold War legacy waste from the Cold War, developing Cold War weapons. You can see over half of all the waste in WIP came from Idaho, and that waste is generated or occupied at the Idaho coast and shipped back to Mexico. The second largest site is Savannah River, third is Rocky Flats, fourth is Los Alamos, and then lesser amounts from Hanford and Oak Ridge have come to WIP so far. And then November 4th, 2024, DOE submitted that permit required legacy waste disposal. Next slide. Not surprisingly, DOE didn't do a good job. And so we're saying that the legacy plan is clearly not acceptable. It says that down-blended plutonium waste, so those pits and pantacs that in theory are going to be down-blended at Los Alamos and shipped to Savannah River and then shipped back to WIP. They want to call that legacy waste, even though the pits, of course, are not waste of any kind. Then they also, so this is an expansion of what was supposed to go into WIP. And they also admit that future pit production is non-legacy waste, but they also want that to go to WIP. So, yeah, that would be waste. Next slide. So a little bit more you all know about the pits. The plant produced 4,000 plutonium pits combined at Savannah River, and Los Alamos during the next 60 years, which is where we get up to the 2080s for that waste to have to come to WIP. But the bottom is an important point. DOE has now admitted that if they would send all of this new pit waste to WIP, that would be 25% of the total volume that would be in WIP. And again, none of this waste was supposed to go to WIP at all. So it shows kind of how much it's to expand the volume. Next slide. In terms of surplus plutonium, here we have a lot of it, 48 metric tons. As I mentioned, a lot of it is at Pantex, still in pit form. The proposal is to ship those pits from Pantex to Los Alamos, turn them into powder, oxide in the Aries plant, pre-processed Los Alamos, then ship it to South Carolina, because neither the pits at Pantex nor the powdered plutonium at Los Alamos are acceptable at WIP. So they would then ship it from Los Alamos back to Savannah River. Savannah River would put stardust into a chemical to try to say it's then transuranic waste that can go to WIP. Again, bottom number, DOE has now said if all of this surplus plutonium goes into WIP, it would constitute 41+% of the total radioactivity. Again, this is radioactivity that was not supposed to go to WIP. So, in terms of what we in New Mexico are doing and encourage others, next slide, please. Encourage others to do is to comment, because the comment period is a 60-day comment period. You can submit by email. We have sample comments on the stopforeverwhip.org website, which is Coalition of Groups Fighting Whip Expansion. We encourage people to do that. And these comments will go to the New Mexico Environment Department permitting agency, and we want to use and will use the comments as the means to hopefully get the Environment Department to reject the plan and to revise the plan to include these kinds of things that I just talked about. Next slide. So we in New Mexico have said for a long time other repositories are necessary. There are laws that say that. A point that frequently gets lost, in 2015, President Obama said that DOE could do a defense high-level waste only repository. So different than Yucca Mountain, different than anything else that's proposed. So that may or may not. The Trump administration didn't change that, didn't do anything about it. The Biden administration hasn't changed it, but hasn't done anything about it. So we don't know that the Trump administration will do anything about it, but it's something to be aware of, and it may come up in this repository report that's coming out by the end of the year that DOE has to do. Next slide. So what about broader environmental management? Project 25, the Heritage Foundation draft plan for how the Trump administration can reshape the government. Scott Young mentioned that in his proposal. I've given you 3 quotes from that may or may not be what the Trump administration wants to do. The first one, it says complete cleanup at all sites by 2035 except for Hanford. They then say, of course, to do that would require increased funding for environmental management. Now, of course, that will run into Elon Musk and others saying they want to get federal funding. So again, we don't know for sure what Trump's going to do with that, but that the project 2025 does talk about increasing funding for environmental management. That may be something we need to talk about in DC days as well. And the last 2 things are primarily targeted at Hanford, and Project 2025 is very clear that Hanford's a problem. And the solution to the problem is to basically say it's not so much of a problem that we can hurry up and declare it cleaned up. One is to fully implement the high-level waste determination, as Kevin mentioned, which is being applied in Idaho and South Carolina, but not in Hanford, which has a huge amount of high-level waste. And then it specifically says to revisit the Hanford cleanup's regulatory framework, which, of course, Nicholas and Hanford Challenge and others have worked for a long time to support and improve. So I will stop there and let Nicholas pick up how Hanford Challenge is planning to, and Washington's planning to deal with that targeting of Hanford. Thank you.
Great. I was asked to hear a little bit about an hour ago, so I won't go into detail about all of the millions of dollars of fraud cases currently going on at Hanford with government contractors, or how it's unclear right now whether any of the 13,000 fire suppression systems are operational or not at the Hanford site. But instead, I'm just going to touch upon a couple things that I think would be could touch upon more than just Hanford or Washington State. And so the first one I'll just transition is that in Project 2025, Hanford is specifically called out as a problem. And if we could just take massive amounts of shortcuts, right, at Hanford and take that magic wand and relabel Hanford's high-level waste to low-level waste, that would be great. Then they could just pour concrete over the waste and put up a mission accomplished banner and walk away from the rest of meaningful cleanup. So we'll be tracking that. We're a little worried that it's specifically called out in Project 2025. So we'll have to wait and see if that is is actually the plan, or what will happen there. As far as the regulatory framework being a problem, what Project 2025 means by that is that the state of Washington also has a say in, how clean is clean at the Hanford site. They'd really love to see, our now governor-elect, previous AG Bob Ferguson, and new AG Nick Brown taken out of the equation. So the Department of Energy can just do what they want to with no accountability and no checks to take a look at their homework. So to see if they can actually relabel some of this waste. The other related issue is that the plan for a lot of Hanford's waste currently is to ship it either by rail or on the highways, either in concrete form or in liquid form to Clive, Utah, and Andrews, Texas, waste control specialists, as it's where that waste will go. And so, if the Department of Energy is allowed to relabel waste, that means more waste and a higher volume of waste being shipped, through Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, all the way down to potentially Texas as well. So it's another issue that we'll be watching really closely. And then the final issue that we don't spend as much time on at Hanford Challenge because we're so focused on the cleanup, but we are hearing a lot of chatter up in Washington State from the Microsofts and just now Amazon of spending a lot of money towards small modular reactors to power these data centers and eventually artificial intelligence, which just takes so much energy. And so I want to put that on other folks' radar, because if they are allowed to do some of these feasibility studies and Washington gives them a break and it turns out that they get their way, it's going to be copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste to other states. So it's something that we'll be watching and sharing with the ANA groups for sure. But it's an issue so far that we're so focused on cleanup and there's so much going on that we just don't have the capacity right now to check to follow the SMRs at this point. But if big news comes out, we'll definitely be sharing it with ANA groups as well. So I'll end there for now. We can take some questions.
So, we were supposed to take a break at 3:20, but we're gonna cheat into the break time a little bit. It's a long break. So, if you have questions for the three of us or anything, Ellen?
That'd be another interest for all this. Is the climate costs. To put out in a national statement that all nations should be looking at more nuclear power as a country. So, it's already got enough
Non-comments have any. Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Tom.
thank you. This is a question for Don. Don, I'm looking at that with Legacy True Waste Disposal Plan website. I'm not looking at the New Mexico Environment website. Not website, but where are the community lines?
Summary of what each site provides itself. So, yes, some of that is there. What's not clearly properly there that should have been. So, for example, Savannah Riverside says that legacy waste is all the waste up until 2014. Everybody else is either before or 1999, 2000 with COVID, which is a more reasonable rate. So there is some information about the site. There's one document from Savannah River that they refer to in the document, not yet released, even though we have asked for it before the plan came out. So we'll see whether that ever comes out. It's sort of how the document is described as how Savannah River is defined legacy waste as being up until 2014.
Okay, just one other quick thing, you said you could, if you submit comments, maybe you can make some with that person and.
Yeah. Yes, we will. Thanks.
Good, thank you, Grace. Yeah, can we, hear from Bob? Bob, please. Yeah, go ahead. What happened to the advanced vitrification plant at Hanford? Nicholas is gonna answer that, Bob.
So the waste treatment plant, is still under construction. They've had to add a couple of pre-treatment type facilities to that plant. It's still not clear whether it will ever be operational. We're hoping that it will be. At some point, right now, it looks like, I think what they've done is they have these big melters in this pre-treatment facility that they've started to heat up. And the plan is to start, I think, treating some lower level waste. I mean, they always say it's around the corner. So we'll just have to wait and see. But it looks like they're closer than ever to actually being able to treat some of Hanford's waste.
Anything else, Bob? What about the cost to the American people? How much has been wasted?
Oh boy. Well, so the latest cost estimates range for Hanford cleanup. I think it's anywhere from 337 up to 600 something, 600,000 billion. So we'll have to. Hanford gets right now about $3.1 billion per year to do more cleanup though, or what the Department of Energy needs to do cleanup needs to be closer to, or what they should be asking for is closer to 5 to 7 billion a year to do cleanup. So I don't know if it's like, at this point, I'm not sure I would say it's considered wasted. You know, they are doing something at Hanford that has never been done before, and that is separating, you know, chemical wastes from nuclear waste in order to run it through the vitrification facility. You know, vitrification of nuclear waste is a technology that has worked. They just run into several issues out at Hanford. Part of the problem was that they decided at the onset that it was going to be a design build. So they were like kicking all of these cans down the road for issues that they would have to say, we'll solve this later, we'll solve this later. And some of those have started to catch up with them. But, you know, I think we'll have to wait. If it works, I'm not sure I would consider it wasted money.
So that figure of up to 600 billion, that's the overall.
Yeah.
What's question?
I don't know the latest estimate. Mia or Liz may know the percentage that's, you know, devoted to either high level waste or low level, or just even the waste treatment plant. So I don't have that number off the top of my head. So.
Just a little bit more on vitrification. I've had it asked of me a couple times by environmentalists and people concerned about nuclear, why can't we just vitrify the waste? And they're talking about commercial spent nuclear fuel. And so they've been sold this bill of goods that there's a solution that's called vitrification. Thank goodness reprocessing really was stopped on commercial sites. We tried various places, Barnwell, South Carolina, was one of the proposed reprocessing sites for commercial. West Valley, New York, they did a mix of commercial and military, made a huge mess up there. But the vitrification aspect that West Valley largely worked to Western County. Again, one of the best watchdogs in the country. Talk to the local watchdogs at West Valley is Diane DeRigo, years, friend at ANA, so ask her your questions. And the GE Morris facility in Illinois, Morris, Illinois, was another commercial processing facility that never fired up, thank goodness. They had a huge design flaw that would have resulted in airborne releases off the charts if they had gone forward. It was a sand bed filter that wouldn't have worked. But, they're constantly trying to revive commercial reprocessing. It's the open secret, even with Holtec, even with interim storage partners. Who are these partners? Orano, France, formerly Ariba, formerly Kojima. The biggest reprocessor in the Western world, France. If they get the waste consolidated in Permian Basin, reprocessing is the next step. They just don't talk about it very often. They're trying to keep it quiet. And now Holtec is in Arkansas, we've heard. Ian in the chat put another proposal out his way on Western Shoshone land. The Department of Energy, pretty much an admission that they know they don't have consent for consolidated interim storage in the Permian Basin, started this program called Consent-Based Siting for Consolidated Interim Storage. It's been underway for years. Holtec was chosen as one of their team leads. Holtec, who has violated the consent of New Mexico, at least since Governor Lujan Grisham was elected. So it's really Orwellian stuff. But Holtec's in Arkansas, as we speak, talking to city councils, trying to convince them not only to agree to the consolidated interim storage in Arkansas. We hadn't heard that one before recently, but also talking more openly about reprocessing. What a great idea. So, reprocessing and vitrification, okay, you've got liquid high-level radioactive waste that needs to be stabilized. That vitrification may be the way to do it. Hasn't gone well at Hanford so far. It went better at West Valley. But for solid commercial irradiated nuclear fuel, to propose vitrification as the solution, reprocessing, in addition to being astronomically expensive and a nuclear weapons proliferation risk off the charts, is also nightmarishly polluting. The releases to the air, the releases to surface waters. Just look at France, just look at England, just look at Russia. It's an environmental nightmare wherever they do this. So it's not a solution.
Yes, I have a question that will have, with all this weight, in the earth and the small land, how do you see it from A and A? How it is affecting the human body?
Yeah, I'm sure there's others in here who could answer it better than me. Alfred's got a book that people should take a look at. What's the title, Alfred?
The scientists who alerted us to the dangers of radiation by Ian Fairley and Cindy Folkers. Welcome to have a look at this. It's just come out in paperback. It's printed in England. There's a paperback edition.
My coworker Cindy Folkers at Beyond Nuclear is one of the co-authors. There's a lot of knowledge about the harmful impact of radioactivity on human health. And there's so many exposure pathways. We have a pamphlet at Beyond Nuclear that our board president emerita, Kay Dry in St. Louis, put together. And as the cover of this pamphlet, it shows a Nuclear Regulatory Commission graphic that they probably are sorry they put out. This case put it out too. What it shows is all of the exposure pathways to a farmer from all of these aspects of the nuclear fuel chain, whether it's weapons, whether it's power, all the ways that radioactivity gets you, through the food, as was mentioned earlier by Andrea, through the water, through the air. And what's fascinating about this book, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. Alfred was telling me that some of these breakthroughs by scientists go back a very long ways in time. One of them was a study of ionizing radioactivity on fruit flies in 1926. And the conclusion was there is no dose low enough that it does not have an impact. And actually that insight has been kind of incorporated into what's called the linear no threshold model, which again agrees that it's supposed to be the basis of health protection in the US, internationally, against radioactivity. But oftentimes it's not, because what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has done, for example, is they said, as long as your exposure is below this level, we deem it permissible, acceptable. Permissible to who? Acceptable to who? Because what that doesn't talk about, but it's kind of goes without saying, is there's gonna be harm. We've decided that the harm being done to human health is acceptable. It's permissible because we're trying to balance out costs to human health and benefits, the profit of the industry, or the security that nuclear weapons provide us as a society, supposedly. So there are bureaucrats and elected officials and appointed officials who are making these determinations on our behalf that this exposure to radioactivity in Burke County is acceptable. It's permissible. We've decided so, but it's not democratic.
Yeah, like, said, okay, I'm from on the river, and I've seen in that farm land, and all that food is grown in that land doesn't stay in Burke County. It goes all over the world. And one thing about food, and I always thought the gnats was black, but I have not seen white gnats. Gnats, white. So, and a lot of people own that in that area, they have cancer.
You said gnats?
Gnat,
Well, it's interesting you say that because I don't remember the artist's name, but there's a German biology artist, graphic artist, who did studies of insects, I believe in the Chernobyl region, and the mutations of insects, alarming and widespread. And it's not just that, but she's done some very famous graphic art, biologically competent graphic art that could be in textbooks and should be in textbooks, so people could begin to learn how harmful radioactivity is to insects, for example, and genetics, for example, because a lot of these deformities are genetic. So the genetic makeup of species is being harmed. And people, I don't know if Rosalie Bertell is mentioned in the book, but Rosalie Bertell, who passed some years ago, she warned that the damage that we're doing to human genetics from this little nuclear experiment that began with the Manhattan Project, and even before that actually, is quite alarming in terms of what that's going to mean for future generations. And of course, it ain't over. The damage that's been done is the tip of the iceberg if we keep going. That's what's being proposed. Keep going. Maybe expands. That's a great question.
I have a follow-up question, and I don't want to make sure I answer this question, but does ANA have an official stance on nuclear impact in the body? That's what I thought I heard your question. Does ANA have an official, not necessarily the resource and the people who know the information, but ANA has a stance on
I don't know if we do or not. I mean, aspects of it we do. We're certainly trying to prevent the harm by preventing, the expansion and the continuation. But it's probably an area of ANA's advocacy that could use some work. I mean, and beyond nuclear with somebody like Cindy Folkers, her expertise, and many others. I mean, Helen Galvacott was mentioned on camera earlier.
like, for the
I think it probably exists on some level and needs to be strengthened significantly. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great question. Any more questions? Online or?
Liz says you can provide those numbers.
Okay. Yeah, Liz, do you want to jump in and provide those numbers?
Sure. As I found the total spent on Christmas so far is 65.8 billion. And there is, this picture shows the waste treatment plant, the unfinished. Are not going to use, so there's definitely money that's wasted. It doesn't, fit the radiation. And then I did find, so there's a new report, that project for the waste treatment plant is referencing that over 20 years for compensation is around 11 billion, but just on the waste treatment plant to date. And we're not there yet. So this is the kind of stuff that could be weaponized against gentrification that the problem does do.
Did the
But
people,
with the companies that come in with the shortcut approach, those built-in issues can be used to say this isn't working, so we're going to do what's objective rather than go in and tricky place. But that's true.
I don't think people were able to hear that.
So Liz put the numbers up for what's been spent so far, and they're going to keep spending something like 11. I forget the figure. I didn't hear it too well either. We're going to end the session and say thank you to
11
Green.
billion spent to date, and it's around 3 billion per year that didn't forget for cleanup. And a portion of that is the waste treatment plant. Once it starts running, they need from the same amount of money that's like 6 to 10 billion a year, which they know they're not going to get. So there's always issues for someday, which we can talk about another time. But
Thanks, Liz. So that ends the Green Cod presentation. We're going to take a break, but we're going to have a prompt start at 4 p.m. And we're going to try to fix the microphone, get it to work before then. So have a good break. Thank you.